I welcome you to this evening's educational panel discussion. The League of Women Voters advocates for issues or causes after study and consensus that creates a position supporting the cause. The State League is advocating for community mental health boards, previously known as 708s, and our local league is in support of the upcoming referendum on the November 5th ballot. We are pleased to be hosting this program tonight, and now I will turn the program over. Wait, I wanted to thank the library for offering us this room. I forgot that. All right, I'll turn this over to Bassi, our Moraine Township Supervisor.
And long-term league leader.
And long-term league member.
Thank you. Just as some background, I am here tonight only to provide information, not to advocate for this in any way. But just to make sure that people who are voting on it have a frame of reference to understand what a community health board is, what it does, and how and whether they think it's appropriate for our community. But I'd first like, when we were initially researching this a year and a half ago, I Zoomed with townships around the state, who have community mental health boards, just to find out how they're working, and these two gentlemen were probably on Zoom with us for an hour and a half, 2 hours, so gracious and generous with their time. And I'd like them to introduce themselves. Michael?
Sure, I'll start. Michael Hovde.
Actually, do we need microphones?
Do we need microphones?
Yes. Okay.
All right.
Do you need them or not?
Michael Hovde. I'm the Bloomingdale Township Supervisor since 2017. I'm also the president of the Metropolitan Township Association, which represents about 2 million residents in basically the Collar counties and Cook County.
And he does a great job. Good evening, everyone. My name is Ken Bruderle. I'm the Elgin Township Supervisor, and I've been seated in May of 2021. And I just attend his meetings. I don't do the leadership of it.
Thank you both. Thank you both for your time on Zoom, but especially for your time traveling here tonight to help us understand how community mental health boards work. We have an informational slides. I am not going to read the slides to you. Good news, I'm simply going to highlight some salient points. These slides are on our township website in English and in Spanish. And if you do not have access to the internet, we'll give you a paper copy. If you have any questions after reading the FAQs, please feel free to call me, call the township, send an email to info@morainetownship.org. So let me look. I will go along with the slides so I don't have to keep turning around. Let's see, Nancy, let's go to slide 1.
It's there.
Oh, voila, magic. If approved by here, you know what, Michael and Ken, you can get. Hi.
Thank you.
I'm a largemouth Bassi. Do I need a microphone? If approved by the voters, Moraine Township would establish a community mental health board for the purpose of funding increased resources for only 3 things. The only 3 things this board can address is mental health services and prevention, substance use disorder services and prevention, and services for intellectually or developmentally disabled Moraine Township residents. So it can only address 3 issues, and it can only use these resources for Moraine Township residents. Community health boards were created in the 1960s by Illinois legislature, and currently there are almost 100 mental health boards around the state. Is that right, Michael?
That's true.
Yeah. Okay, so I think next slide. So on our website, there are answers to what does the community health board do, what are the current needs, how does community health board work, How is the community health board funded? How can community mental health board funds be used to help township residents? What is the relationship between a township board of trustees and a township community mental health board? And what will I see on my ballot November 5th? Next slide, next slide, and then next slide, because I think we've already done that one.
You want the next one after?
Yes, I'm going to have to. That one's fine. There are 3 slides which talk about what is happening nationally in our community, what the needs for use of these resources could be. And I'm not going to read the slides to you, they're on our website. You know, just the national statistics on mental health and substance use and disorder and IDD. And then there are a couple slides after that, so go on to in our community. These you can read for yourself, you know, on the website or on a piece of paper if you want, and call if you have any questions. But it's just pretty dense information. How does a community health board work? Voila, that's magic. Nancy, you're amazing. Want to emphasize, a community mental health board is not, I repeat, not a new unit of government. People talk about too many units of government in Illinois. This is not a new unit of government. It is independent from the township, but it's not a new unit of government. The board is comprised of 7 to 9 township residents and can include a youth representative. Board members are appointed by the township supervisor to put together a puzzle of experience and expertise from the community to weigh in on these topics. These board members must live in the township and they are not compensated, these board members. The board, once formed, commissions or performs a needs assessment in the community to identify gaps between needs and resources, and develops a 1-year and 3-year plan to determine how these additional funds could be used to make the greatest impact in our community on these 3 areas: mental health, substance use disorder, and IDD. Working with new and existing partners. The community mental health board then develops a budget, and the township board approves the budget. I think we can go to the next slide. Is that okay?
The referendum.
How is a community health board funded? On the November ballot, voters will be asked to levy, if the township should levy.
Yeah, no, not there.
How is the board funded?
Yeah.
Got it?
Oops, you were just there. There you go.
Okay, I missed
Okay.
it.
On the November ballot, voters will be asked if Moraine Township should levy an annual tax of 3/100%. That translates into less than $10 on a $100,000 home. Do the math. $30 a year on a $300,000 home, $50 a year on a $500,000 home, and that could raise between $800,000 and $900,000 in this community to address mental health services and prevention, substance use disorder services and prevention, and services for intellectually and developmentally disabled residents. How can the funds be used? Next one. Okay. The Illinois statute delineates how these funds can be used. And specifically how the funds. Some examples of permitted uses, but this board, this independent board with its expertise, will decide the best allocation based on a needs assessment. Some examples of permitted uses are grants to existing providers for mental health counseling for township residents, youth counseling, substance use disorder services, or services for IDD. If the board decides that there are a lot of people in our community who do not have insurance or have insurance but can't afford a year's worth of $25 a week co-pays, then they can establish guidelines, income guidelines for helping residents directly with co-pays, insurance, or treatments. That would be up to the board. It can be used for youth counseling and support. For example, Moraine Township currently helps fund a clinician at the Highland Park High School drop-in center 1 day a week. It used to be 2 days a week. It would be great if additional days could be funded since it was widely used. The counselor was widely used at the drop-in center when it was available 2 days a week. A township mental health board will decide how the funds could be allocated to provide the greatest impact in our community based on a needs assessment. Next slide. What is the relationship between a community mental health board and a township board of trustees? The board is not a new unit of government. It's independent and brings expertise and experience in the 3 areas it addresses. The relationship to the township board is limited to, if the voters approve a levy, then the township would add whatever the voters approved to its levy when it presents it in the fall to the county clerk. The township supervisor appoints the members of the board. The township board approves the community mental health board budget and receives an annual report of how they have spent the funds and what they believe the impact in the community has been. Next, what will voters see on their ballot? It's, sadly, statutorily prescribed language, which may or may not be all that comprehensive. It's not clear language. Let's see. So, on the November ballot, shall Moraine Township levy an annual tax not to exceed 0.03% for the purpose of providing community mental health facilities and services, including facilities and services for persons with an intellectual or developmental disability or a substance use disorder, yes or no? And then there are 2 items, one, how much it will cost, and 2, how much the levy increases by. And for any of you who want a deeper thing to read, you're welcome to it. We'll take questions, I think, at the end. But meanwhile, I would like to ask Michael and Ken, Michael, maybe you'll start, about how the Community Mental Health Board came into being in their community, how it was formed, how it works, just, some information, and then we're all available to answer questions, understanding I am here for education and not for advocacy.
Thank you. So in Bloomingdale Township, we had a grassroots effort of citizens who gathered the petitions to put it on the ballot. So it was not put on by the existing town board, it was put on by the citizens. So it's one of the very unique Illinois entities or statutes that allows citizens to put something on the ballot that's binding. So it's kind of unique. There are actually 2 different sections of the law, I won't bore you on those. They actually have slightly different language, whether it's the board putting it on the ballot or the grassroots. And that's a little bit like getting into that PTEL language problem. Being the president of the Metropolitan Township Association, I was heavily involved in some of this language to fix the PTEL problem. Unfortunately, if anyone's spent any time in or near Springfield, things get compressed very quickly and they make lots of quick decisions that don't always make sense. So I still think there's going to be litigation involving this. They have some conflicting.
Do you want to explain what PTEL is?
So PTEL is a property tax extension limitation law that says that a certain amount, well, there's 2 things it does. So one is you have to tell people when they vote for an increase, like a referendum to build schools or tax increase to help fund operating expenses, what the cost would be for a theoretical $100,000 house. And the second thing PTEL has to do with is the tax caps, which is that you can only increase a certain amount. So there was a lawsuit in King County after Dundee and Elgin Township created their mental health boards in 2020. The county clerk refused to extend the taxes. The county state's attorney reviewed that decision and said, yes, you're correct. You should have had this language. And there was a lawsuit, and it turned out they lost. So Dundee lost. So they tried to fix it by adding that those boards were legal. But then there were some other problems. So now they actually put in that PTEL language needs to be in the law. I know I'm probably losing you. But the interesting part is that they actually put into the law that PTEL, that an annual tax levied by a 708 board is not subject to PTEL. So they have it in there twice. So one part says you have to have it, one part says it's not subject to PTEL. So let's back up to 2017.
Dealer's choice, right?
Right. I'm running for Township Supervisor as a brand new person coming from a village board. This 708 referendum is on the ballot. It wins and I win. Now the law says I have 60 days to appoint a board. We were, from what we could tell, the first mental health board that had been formed in probably since 1970s. So I reached out to many existing boards, and nobody there was there when they were formed, so they didn't know how to start. Oak Park, I reached out to Hanover, several other ones, Kendall County. Nobody knew what to do. So we just kind of made it up as we went along. So I took the very conservative view of 60 days from the election. So really 30 days from when I'm sworn in is when we have to appoint the board. So you have to appoint the board, they have to have a first meeting and do some other things. So the law has been changed a little bit about who can be on the board. So in the past, it just had to be a township resident. So Springfield changed that slightly, and they kind of have qualifications now for board members, being from local health departments, health planning agencies, hospital boards, and then they added in persons with lived or professional expertise in those areas, mental health, developmental disability, and substance abuse. We don't define what lived expertise is, so that's kind of a hole you can drive a truck through, I guess. If a family member who's had any one of those issues, which I have, it's certainly something that you probably know more about these things than professionals because you've lived it. So I understand why that's in there, but it's just kind of interesting that they made that a requirement. So after the board is set up, you have to levy taxes in the fall, and the way that taxes work for real estate, they don't come out till the next year. So this board's going to be formed in November. I don't know if you'll have enough time. Your attorney will tell you whether you can levy it.
We've actually had the conversation with the attorney, and if it passes, we will see, but the county clerk seems to think it can be levied this November to get the funds in June of next year, but that's a discussion we'll have when we have that issue.
So the one issue you have then is that money won't be available until those first tax bills roll in June, roughly, so you'll still have a delay before the board has any money to do anything. Then, when the board is set up, you have a brand new board, they have no rules. They have to adopt rules, they have to create their own constitution, their bylaws, they have to elect officers. So there's a lot of busy work in the first several months of first forming the board, then drafting these bylaws, coming up with rules on how we're going to do things, electing the officers. So we again reached out to many different mental health boards and kind of came up with our own version. I've shared those with many townships that have had mental health boards, and I think part of our bylaws are in lots of these new ones, which I'm proud of. So the interesting thing and the nice thing about 708 boards or mental health boards, community mental health boards, is they're very local. And by very local, each township, or they can be countywide or they can be citywide, there's different, it doesn't have to just be a township. Each one can make their own decisions on what is more important to be funded and what is a need in their area. So in Bloomingdale Township, maybe we have more of a need in one area, and we want to fund this, whereas in your township, you might say, no, we have something else. There's nothing that requires a certain percentage go to any certain topic or certain area. So that's something that I think is very refreshing. There's really no rules to that. The other thing you may see is the way that we did it was we asked for people to make application to us for funding. And it's not a grant, we kind of refer to them as grants, but a grant typically means no strings attached. It's really a fee for service. So you are saying, we will provide this service to your residents, and you will give us this sum of money to perform those services. We reserve the right to not pay you if you're not performing. So it's not a no strings attached type thing. Some of the things we funded, we have 3 in-house mental health counselors for youth that go into the schools. We funded mental health counselors for the police departments that are available for them. One thing we funded that the gentleman had talked to me about co-pays. So we haven't directly funded co-pays, some people do that. But we funded transportation to a free service. So the theory being, if it costs $100 or $150 to see a professional, but you get a free one and it's a $10 cab ride, why wouldn't we pay for that $10 cab ride to give them free services? So we funded some transportation to get them to places where they could receive service. I don't know if I'm going on too long.
No, well, do we have I think we're fine. One of the things, talk about how big your townships are. So your township is.
My township's about 110,000 people. So one of the other things
And
to
for
point out.
frame of reference, Moraine is 34.
So
Thousand.
your levy is for a 0.03% rate. So at the time when we did it, it was a 0.15. So it's up to 0.15. So we don't levy the 0.15. That would have tripled our township levy, but we're allowed to go up to that limit.
And the limit still is 0.15 or 0.015. We opted not to go to the maximum. We opted to go for less because we're a smaller township.
Right, but are you limited to that 0.03 then without
Yes.
another referendum?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, very, very informative. Well, tonight, the Elgin Township Mental Health Board is meeting right now at the same time, 6 o'clock, but they're in Elgin. Before I get into the nuts and bolts, basically, why even do this? Why have a referendum? Why do it? So that's been asked a million times. The main reason one would do a referendum and have a 708 Community Mental Health Board is to earmark those taxes to help the people that need the help in mental health, these 3 areas. It's earmarked, so you can't use that money to fund something else. So it's a nice way to guarantee funding to help in mental health. So that's why people like to do this, because it guarantees funding, it earmarks it for this purpose. We call it 708 Community Mental Health Board, but it's actually, once it's done, it's called the Community Mental Health Board. And somehow they lose the 708 part. And the Community Mental Health Act is very clear on what to do. As Mike mentioned, 60 days once it's passed, you got to form a mental health board. The mental health board has to elect officers, they have to come up with bylaws, they have to come up with rules, they have to do a needs assessment. There is a theory in government that says one should not tax the people without having a purpose for that tax, without having a plan how you're going to use it. So it's very important that the mental health board says, here are the needs, here's why we need the money, and here's how we're going to use it. Does all that make sense? One of the members of the mental health board does have to come from the governing board, and that would be someone on the trust, the township board would be an official member of the mental health board, not just a liaison.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay, so that's kind of good. The levy, that's that's a whole nother can of worms. In Elgin Township, everything is fine. It took a lot of legislation because the people that came before me, and they tried very hard to make this work. They started with grassroots. The community got together, had petitions signed, and well, there was an error, so that didn't work. So then the township board before me said, let's just put it on the ballot, which they did. And there were some issues there, and Mike alluded to it, that it violated some rules. So the Community Mental Health Act says levies under this act are not subject to limitation. What does that mean? The PTEL says the governing body cannot go more than the consumer price index or a certain number every year. But yet the Community Mental Health Act says you gotta crawl before you walk, before you run. So theoretically, the Community Mental Health Board would only levy what they need and they'll work up to it. Well, so the the township board, this is a conflict. So right now, the Elgin Mental Health Board is fine, it's good. It took a process to get to it. We, on our board, we don't want anyone on the board with a conflict of interest. So for example, if you're a professional and you work for an organization and then you want funding from the board to where you work, we think that's a conflict of interest. So we look at people who are passionate about helping, and people on a board that maybe we're not funding, and a regular member of the community. I think most of us, if not every one of us, could kind of have some mental health situations in our families somewhere. So that's enough to qualify if you're passionate. How's that?
That's fine. And, the mental health board meetings are open to the public, and citizens and organizations come and talk about needs and address the board directly. Is that correct? And just, clarify the 708. 708 was the number of the bill in the 1960s. And at the time, there was no area code 708. It predated the 708 area code. So that's why it's called the 708 board, but we all know what it is. We would like to open this up for questions and say who you want to direct them to. And I see Gail, I see Sharon, and I see Jill. Okay, so let's go in order of who I saw. Gail?
Okay. Thank you for taking, anyone can answer this. Once appointed by the supervisor, how long does a person serve?
Oh, good question. That's a great question. And as we mentioned before, everything's dictated in statute. So there's the staggered terms. The 4-year, 1 year, 2 years, so all the terms are to expire not at the same time.
So the very first board will have staggered terms. So there'll be 2 for 4 years, 2 for 3 years, and I think 3 for 2 years. And then after that, there are 4-year terms.
Does that answer your question, Gail?
Yes.
Okay, Sharon?
Hi, I found it very fascinating from a nerd perspective to listen to the history of the creation and the implementation and so on. What I want to know, for those of you who had the board, what are your measurements for, I won't use the word success, I think it's overrated, but but success, no.
Performance measures.
Performance measures, and what are those performance measures? If I'm trying to talk to somebody about this referendum, and let's say I'm supporting it, they don't want to hear the history.
Right. It's very so. As you know, it's very difficult to measure success in sort of abstract things. Did somebody's mental health get better? well, there's not really a test you can take to say, well, you were 74 before you started treatment, and now you're at 82. One way we measure success is we had one youth counselor when we started. We had a waiting
Well,
list
that's what I.
of about
Right.
4 weeks to get in to see them. Now our waiting list is gone, and we have many more hours of service. So that's a metric. How many hours of service have you performed? Our 4 police departments will absolutely testify that it has reduced a lot of stress on police officers doing their jobs. It has reduced incidents between residents, non-residents as well, people dealing with the police, because they can have a mental health professional do some intervention versus a police officer. And we have the 2 of the police departments do it with an outside agency, so we have the number of hours that they've spent. Some of the agencies we fund do give us very detailed performance. Here's a person we saw, they're from your township, who performed these services. Other ones are a little more nebulous. We have group counseling, it's anonymous. We know who these people are, but they come in. We have a youth center. We had one behavioral change group that did after school stuff for kids who were at risk with some mental health issues. So they provided them, I guess, hours of diversion. I don't know if it was considered treatment, but it kept them out of trouble and helped them get good peer interaction. So depending on what you have, if you're trying to sell this to somebody, I guess it would be you're increasing the amount of services available to people.
Well, and that's, I'm sorry, I didn't want anybody to think that I wanted numbers. I know personally, you can't give numbers, but those in a way are numbers too.
And Michael, how do the agencies provide numbers without or provide information about the residents they serve without violating HIPAA?
Right, so anybody who is in the healthcare industry is well aware of HIPAA requirements. We are not like an insurance agency or somebody like that can receive protected health information. So everything we get is redacted to the extent it just shows the zip code or the fact that they're in our township, if it's somebody who's receiving services that way. But our in-house counselors know who they're dealing with, and they only deal with township residents. So that's pretty simple, and we have 3 full-time people. The counselors at the police departments, one of our police departments is totally within the township. The other 3 are mostly, but also in other townships, but their headquarters are in the township. So a little difficult to say, is the person receiving services in the township? Our theory on that is the police department is in the township, and you're reducing stress and conflict there. So we do receive reporting. That's one of the growing pains that we've had. So once you get a little more mature and more people come out and realize that there's a funding source, to be vigilant on that. And that's our mental health board's meeting tonight as well, to consider awards of funding. And that's one of the things they consider is, how do we measure this? And what are you proposing? Are you just saying we're going to add this to our budget, or are you going to expand services? Are you going to extend your services into our township? One of the reasons that the Community Mental Health Act exists is to supplement existing services, not necessarily to create new ones. So we take an infrastructure that's already there and say, well, for just this amount of money, we can extend these services. So that's something that is very quantifiable, to say, we never offered services to people in your township, now we can. One of our police departments is actually sending a counselor to our senior center to do some counseling there, which is covered under the Mental Health Act. Is very broad. There's 3 narrow categories, but each category can be very broad. So
Thank you.
hope that answers your question.
Jill?
Yes, I have a couple questions. One, I just wanted, is it on the upcoming November 5th ballot?
Yes.
Okay, it's on that November 5th ballot. And so I was wondering, so why we're just doing this 708 and IDD is like kind of a subcategory, but you keep saying mental health, and people might not. Sometimes I feel like when an IDD is combined with another one, they become an oversight, or you don't necessarily pay attention to them, and I know that there are 377 boards. And did you consider doing both a 377 board and a 708, which the 377 is for developmental disabilities, and some counties have both.
We're a township, and.
Right, well, I'm looking at a map that shows counties and townships, so.
And the needs assessment is done by a professional, like a university, and they do a random survey, I think in our township of 2,000 out of our 14,000 households, and they address each of these issues separately to find out the needs in our township. And IDD is covered under 708, and so we feel that the needs assessment should reveal, and then after the needs assessment, there are focus groups, and the focus groups would be around town on all issues. You know, we cannot be, no mental health board and no township can do everything for everybody. We feel this, never mind, I can't go there. We felt this was an appropriate thing to ask our community at this time, if they thought this was appropriate for our community at this time.
Okay, because my example, for example, we have the transportation in Moraine, that is given by Moraine Township. And it's supposed to cover elderly and IDD, but it's 90% elderly, and it's rare that an IDD person can get served by it, and that's my concern
I
with this.
would love to have you come into the township and discuss all of your issues, you know, transportation, you know, is something.
We've had that talk, and in fact, what you said to me was, well, do you want me to not have an elderly person make it to their
You know,
appointment?
let us have this offline. If
Okay, well, but
transportation is your question, let's talk offline, please come back.
Okay,
to the
but so
township.
I still want to bring up that, so you just didn't even consider the 377 board. Did you, either of you consider the 377 board? Okay, that's.
Thank you.
So I'll speak up. So our community mental health board was a grassroots petition, and they chose to put this in place. I'm not well versed on the 377 board, but we do fund developmental disability. One thing I would urge you to do, which helped in our case, was when the board was formed and they were having their first meetings, and our board, I don't know if the other ones do it, they do all their deliberations in an open meeting. There's no closed meetings, there's no anything like that. So when they were coming up with what their funding priorities were, every community mental health meeting, there's public comment. And the very, the beginning stages of forming it to adopting the bylaws, many people from all different walks of life voiced their opinions to tell that board what they thought was important. And that's a good place. The other part is for those agencies that provide those services to put in an application for funding. The board can only fund those that ask. And sometimes you run into that problem where people don't ask.
Any other questions?
I have two questions. They're kind of connected. The first one is, how have you promoted that all these services are now going to be available once the board is in place? And then how do you report back on the accomplishments for the people you've served? You know, is there a communication strategy? How are you doing all of that?
So we're a very bare bones community mental health board. There's no employees, so our township staff kind of fill in the gaps on that. So we haven't engaged anyone to do communication other than we post the awards on our website, we put it in social media, we tell the newspaper. We do have some passionate citizens who helped put this on the ballot that help us amplify that, as well as let people know that funding is available. So we announce it, newspaper, social media, our website, and then there are certain kind of, I hesitate to call them power partners because they're not partners, but people who are centers of information that once they know the information, they broadcast it to certain groups. So that's been our strategy on letting people know funding's available and also letting them know what we've done.
Other questions?
I was gonna elaborate
Oh, wait, let Ken.
on that other question. So there, as was mentioned before, the 708 board is not a new unit of government. It's an extension of the current unit of government, which means the 708 board follows all the Open Meeting Act rules. So for example, that meeting has to be posted in, no less than 48 hours before the meeting takes place. It has to be in a public place. It has to make sure handicapped people can get there. And then it has to allow for public comments. So as Mike was mentioning, that they have to follow that. It's not gonna be in the middle of the night meeting and decisions made. The public would be made aware of it and is invited to attend. And then once a community mental health board is established, in addition to the funding, board can also get funding other than the taxes. That's the main part. Taxes earmarked for this purpose, but they can apply for grants. They can get funding from corporations, private citizens. They can fund it in addition to taxes.
In theory, you can apply for state funding, because the state is supposed to be a funder of mental health.
Right, and you can also,
I think we talked about that.
right, the Community Mental Health Board is also permitted to form a 501c3 charitable organization to support, to accept donations and things like that as well.
Okay. What's your name?
Kevin Cullither.
Hi, Kevin.
I'm curious about your governmental organizations within each of your townships. I mean, you've talked about police departments, you've talked about going into schools. Here within Moraine Township, there are 2 independent cities, each with its own police department. In addition to which, there are 2 school districts. So what sort of coordination is there between bodies of government and your mental health boards?
So we have 4 main police departments in our township. So 2 of them partner on their funding request, and they have an outside service that has professional counselors. They do it as needed, so they only bill us for the time they're there. The other 2 departments have in-house counselors, and we partially fund them at a lower level. We have 2 high school districts and a number of elementary schools and 4 elementary districts, I believe, in our township. So our youth service department that goes into those schools helps coordinate with the schools. We do receive referrals from them as far as at-risk children. Hope that answers the question.
Any other questions? Larry?
I know that Lake County has a health department. Why isn't the Lake County involved as opposed to the townships?
That's a good question. As we mentioned, the state theoretically under statute should fund mental health. And the county any governing board can do it, as mentioned before. State, county, village, municipality. In Kane County, that was on the table, and they thought they should have a county-wide mental health board. As it unfolded, to make a long story short, it was determined that it would be more productive and prudent to have it at a local level, because as we said before, if you all pay to a county, what if the northern part of the county is getting more than the southern part of the county? And the key is, the more local you make it, the more your local needs could be addressed.
And I'm not advocating, but I'd like to echo that the funds created by Moraine Township would be used only for Moraine Township residents. Having been on the county board for 10 years, that is not true of all funds that go to the county.
Yeah, I'll jump in on a little bit. So I don't have the site right in front of me. In the Community Mental Health Act, it specifically says that the funds from the Community Mental Health Board are used to supplement existing services for things that are needed in your area. A former county board member in DuPage County, where I'm from, suggested to us that we just levy the maximum and give them the money, and they knew how to spend it. And my response was, well, if the county was doing their job with mental health and substance abuse disorder and developmental disability, the people wouldn't have voted for this. So if the county was doing what they were supposed to be doing, this wouldn't have passed. And again, the local nature of this is, you're not funding people from, another area, and it's on the tax bill. So it's the residents voting for this, the residents are paying this, and it's for the residents that live there.
And what you mentioned, the statute says one can do a 708 community mental health bill subject to X amount. And many communities ask for the maximum amount, and you're not, which is interesting, because when you ask for the maximum amount, that's a lot of money. I have about 106,000 residents in Elgin Township, and that would represent like $4 million raise. Well, so that's very prudent what you're doing. But the key is, the reason why the Mental Health Community Health Act is not subject to limitation is because of this. Just because the boards, most boards are gonna map to levy what they need. So let's just pretend they could levy $4 million. Well, they're not gonna do that. They can levy what they need on a year-to-year basis, so long as they don't exceed what the referendum was passed at. So it's more prudent for the mental health board to be good stewards and make sure they're gonna use the money where it's needed. Does that explain that?
I'd like to hear a little bit more about the relationship between the township government board and this community mental health board. For instance, does the township supervise it like it would like a committee? Is there the reporting relationship?
The township board receives an annual report from the mental health board. They approve their budget, they include the levy with their levy, and they appoint the members, and one township trustee can be on the board. They do not,
They don't
one
micro-
trustee.
They don't
Can't.
micromanage, is what you're saying, or?
I do not believe they do.
I'll answer that question. So we approve the levy every year for them. So theoretically, if they ask for actually the first year that our community mental health board, the very first year they were formed, we actually increased the levy request because we thought it was too low. So we have the ability to either raise or lower the levy request. But it is part of the township organization, so all our bills do go through our office to be paid. As the supervisor, you're the treasurer for the township, so we do review those bills, make sure they're within budget, if there's things missing. So there's a review there. They're not just paid. They're reviewed by the mental health board first at a meeting. They go through them and recommend which bills are to be paid. Then they pass them on to us, and then we do that.
So you elected your township officials. They're the only ones that have the ability to levy on your behalf. So although the mental health board is very autonomous and very, very independent, the checkpoints are the township board has the final say on what they're gonna levy. So the township, a mental health board could say, I'll just make a number up, and $20 million, and the township board would say, no, only $500,000. So the township board controls it that way. Does that help answer your question?
How about what is being done?
On a day-to-day,
Or the focus, the priorities of the community mental health.
so in Elgin Township, we were very fortunate to appoint a board. They came from all walks of life. It's very diverse, and they're receptive to the supervisors and the board of trustees' suggestions.
In Bloomingdale Township, the board is very autonomous as far as what they choose to fund, and that's why you try to pick the right people for the board, especially people who can work together. So they review the funding requests. They don't fund all of them. Even if they have enough money, they don't fund them all, because sometimes the requests they're either not relevant to the mission, because it is somewhat of a narrow mission, or there's something that it just can't be quantified at all. We had some wonderful requests for funding that were great programs, but they don't fit the mission of the community mental health board.
And when you say they review, you're talking about the Community
The Community
Mental
Mental
Health
Health
Board
Board, right.
reviews, not the township.
Right, the community mental health board makes the final decision on which ones are funded.
So who selected the members for the community mental health?
So it's the executive of the unit of government, which in this case would be the township supervisor, and then it is approved with the consent of the township board. So that law was recently changed, and they added in there that a township or a community mental health board may come up with an application process, and they may give suggestions on who to choose to the township supervisor. So that's in the mix too, but you have to adopt those rules first.
So since Elgin's this is work in progress, we're relatively new at this. What I did is I sent out a letter of interest for the community, and that was amazing. And then as a supervisor in my board of trustees, we looked at all those, and we kind of invited people to then fill out an application. So there was a process of vetting the people. And as far as back to the health, the county and the health department, they do, as we mentioned, the 708 supplements other funding. What we did is kind of interesting. I almost hate to say it, or I don't want to start a precedent, but I petitioned the King County to help fund our mental health board. So we were granted funds from the county to fund our mental health board in addition to the other sources of income, because we demonstrated a need, and it worked out.
How many more questions do we have time for?
We could do a few if there are any.
Any other questions?
Was there any conversation, sorry, I came so late.
That's okay.
I'm Carol Rosen. I was wondering if there was any conversation about how the levy was, determined, the amount of money that was going to be taxed, and if there was any, conversation and wiggle room in what was just ultimately decided, and is that possibly different between your communities?
So in Bloomingdale Township, the law was at the time you can levy up to 0.15%. So when the mental health board met, formed, adopted their bylaws, did a needs assessment, we also did a little bit of kind of amateur statistical analysis and looked at what other mental health boards were doing that were similar sized populations, and I kind of came up with a suggested budget, and that's really what we went with. We looked at Hanover Township, which is just a few miles to the west of us, about the same size. They've had a mental health board for 40 years. Their levy was about $1.2 million, and we levied, I think, $800,000 our first year, figuring we're startup, see where we're at. Once we have the funding requests come in and we started to do awards, then you get a better idea of how it is going forward. You see what the need is, you see what you spend. You don't want to just be accumulating funds. So that's a little bit of a work in progress when you start.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The mental health, Community Mental Health Act dictates to do a needs assessment, analyze the needs, and that's how you base your request for funding. So it's not just arbitrary.
I'll add one more thing too. So one of the nice things about the Community Mental Health Act is that every board can, like I said before, it can be different. So one board that I'm aware of gives many small funding amounts. funds. So they give a lot of 20,000, 10,000, you know, things like that. So they may give, you know, 50, 60 grants or funding awards in a year. Our mental health board chose to do some that were a little larger, but we had a particular hospital chain came to us when we were first started, and they wanted to do a substance abuse program that would have been our entire levy. And the board made a kind of a policy decision that, you know, we're not going to get involved in these big, heavy lifts. You know, we're going to do what the act kind of suggests, which is to supplement existing programs, not create new ones. And there are other sources of funding that are much greater to do those sorts of things. You mentioned the county. Our county in DuPage, they have $1 billion budget. So our mental health levy is a drop in the bucket compared to them.
Janet?
I can project. I think I can project better than I can use a microphone. I know that our board is just factual up here today, but I wanted to speak from firsthand experience as far as what's happening with the need in the community. A lot of you know my husband, everyone thinks he's teaching at the high school. He's only volunteering, but he works as many hours as a teacher, and I go in less, but we've been there frequently, and often we'll even meet the same students. He'll get them in math, I'll get them in English. And I can't tell you how upsetting it is to work with some of the kids and see the pressures they have. And I'm thinking of one student in particular that both he and I were aware of at one time, who's in crisis. And so we're finding, since we're not full-time there, we have to ask, you know, where should we suggest he go and what do they have? And they talk about, you know, the drop-in center. Well, these kids have a schedule, you know, and they're supposed to be trying to keep up in their classes. And even when it's funded 2 days a week, you know, what if you don't have a free period on Monday and Wednesday and you only have it on Tuesday? And we used to worry so much, we would take that worry home because, you know, did the student show up to the center where we told him he should go? You know, was the person in? Did they have enough time to see him? And there's a lot of kids. It's what, almost 2,000 kids that have Park-High School? I'm not sure since my daughter's out now, but it's a lot of human beings who are under tremendous pressure right now. And it's really critical that we step up because they just can't wait. I mean, it's heartbreaking to be around that many human beings and not be able to, you know, say, go to room 320 right now, you know. Sorry, it just doesn't work that way. So I think this is a wonderful opportunity for us, and I think it will involve the community more. We'll all get more educated, and I think that may have a ripple effect also. So I think it's a great thing, and I'm so glad you stepped up to it. Thank you.
I just want to know also, like, I'm a huge fan of research, and one of the things we've done at the Arc of Illinois through our coalition, Going Home Coalition, is have a meeting on 377 boards and 708 boards. And I know my friend asked a question, but where do you see the overlap of developmental disabilities and mental health? We know that there's a lot of like co-occurring instances of this, but in your established boards as 708 boards, where do you see the intersection of how you're using those funds through mental health and serving the developmental disabilities communities?
So the easiest answer to that is our youth service bureau, which is in the schools. You know, many times mental health issues really can't be diagnosed at a younger age because they're adolescents, their brains aren't fully formed, and there's certain diagnoses that can't happen. And sometimes there are behaviors that are really more developmental disability. So I think that's the intersection there is we have people that are having issues and the youth service counselors are working with that. One of the things we did, we have a program where we've tried to connect the agencies that provide services together in Bloomingdale Township so that if you're at a school and you have a student that has issue A and you don't know where to go, you come to us and we have the network of, oh no, that's a developmental disability issue, or that's a substance abuse issue, or that's this, or these people provide this. And that's something we've had for 4 years now that's been building, and we have a lot of great, they're not governmental agencies, so I can't call them intergovernmental meetings, but inter-organizational meetings where they get together and talk. And sometimes you have those silos where you have, we do this and we do this, and you don't know what they do and they don't know what you do, and we've been trying to sort of merge them together so everybody knows what else is out there. So I mean, that's the way we've addressed it. The other part is, every board, again, and say it again, is different. There are many things you can concentrate on. Any one of mental health, developmental disability, substance abuse disorder, any one of those issues can take 100% of your levy, and any portion of one of those issues can take 100% of your levy. So you need to, be a little bit more restrained sometimes and say, we need to fix, well, not fix, but we need to address the things where we can make a difference. Not try to fix one thing and just throw it all out there, or try to fix everything and not make a difference.
Anyone else? Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Oh, sure.
You have the,
No,
microphone.
no,
You
no.
have the microphone.
That's right. She has the microphone and knows how to use it.
So the levy percentage, the 0.03, right? If in the first year, it's not going to be possibly understood how to use it, because there'll be a lot of work that will be going into figuring it out. So will that roll over year if if the levy that's collected, if it's not all used, will that roll over and supplement the following year?
Yes.
Or years?
Yes.
Okay.
It is restricted funds.
But it is restricted.
It is restricted funds. It is a special restricted fund, and it cannot be used for any other township.
That was, okay.
It's earmarked just for these three purposes. And if this were to pass, then the township would have 60 days to start of the procedure, not to put together a mental health board. And if they did get a levy in this year, that's not coming till next year. So there really won't be like, oh, it's passed, there's a bunch of money. It's a process.
So it's more likely that it will be able to be figured out how to use it. Okay, I just
So that's
wondered
plenty of
whether,
time to get ready by the time the money comes in.
just wondered whether it's rolled over so that you, let's say that the following year you have more need.
Right, so in Bloomingdale Township, learning from experience, we put in so everybody who receives funding, they send a contract. Because they give us an application that says what they're going to do, so then we make them sign that they will do that. And we put a time limit of 18 months on the funding that they need to, have invoiced us, et cetera, for 18 months, because some of them actually ended a program, and we're very honest about it. We had one that said, we're not doing this anymore, we don't need the money, you can put it back in your fund. So we were able to do that. Then we said, we need to come up with a program, and if they don't bill us, the contract doesn't say how long they have, so now we put an 18-month on there. So once you're up and running, you'll have some that people won't spend, and you'll be able to put it back in there. We do funding sort of once a year, but we always have a reserve for kind of emergency, or said, hey, what happens if the best idea you ever heard of shows up? Right after you gave away all the money, what do you do? So we have a contingency that we've held aside for that, and that number stays relatively constant, because if we haven't spent the money, then we give away more. And some people can't spend the money in a 12-month period, so you do have that rollover happening.
And then the other question that I had was, if you're not choosing some portion of this board because of concern about conflict of interest, how do you ensure that you're going to get expertise on the board? People who are
That's where they
Professionals.
are professional, capable of making this.
They rework the law that allow that. Like you have it right in front of you.
So I mean, the law says, so it used to say board members may be interested groups such as comprehensive health agencies, hospital boards, associations concerned with mental health, developmental disability, et cetera. Now it says they shall be, or with lived experience. Now, the thing that we found, I still serve on a number of charitable boards. I've been on many boards before. I heard once, don't make the accountant your treasurer, do something, don't have the people kind of pigeonhole. So we have people with a wide variety of experience on our board, and that's one of the pitches that we gave people on why the board was a good idea, was it's regular people making these decisions who have common sense. So if I have a mental health professional or a developmental disability organization coming to me, and they can explain it to somebody who's a parent or who's a business owner or something, they're not just talking their language. That makes it a little easier to sell to the public.
And also, remember, you can have people who work in the substance use disorder field, or people who work in the mental health field, or people who work in the IDD field, who are not working for agencies that are applying for your funding. So, you can get that expertise without a conflict.
That kind of answers my question.
Since you have open meetings, what would be the procedure for someone who decides they would like to get some help with mental issues or whatever the case may be? How do they go about taking advantage of what the board has to offer? Since you have open meetings, they don't want to come to a meeting and say, I'm here because of such and such. How does that work?
So our board doesn't provide the services. They're the board that decides which agencies get funded that provide the services. Now, you are allowed under the Community Mental Health Act to provide services yourself. So you could say we have in-house counselors. So that's the job of whoever you're funding to make available to the public what they do and how you contact them. I don't think we've ever had someone come to a mental health board meeting seeking any services. All the agencies we fund are where they would go.
And in addition, if there were a board, and it decided that there were many community members who needed help because they were uninsured or they couldn't afford the co-pays, and they wanted the availability to go to a provider of their choice rather than the ones who are providing free services, the board could, if it chose to, establish income guidelines, and there could be someone who then reviews confidentially, like we do with general assistance. We have a caseworker who reviews confidentially applications and do you meet the guidelines for GA that are established by state law, or for assistance from the mental health board established by the mental health board, if that board chose to do that. And it's all confidential. I mean, anything that happens in the township office one-on-one is confidential. You will never hear about it. Well, first of all, I have to thank these two gentlemen for traveling so far in rush hour to be here and provide their incredible expertise and experience with